and I'm reading today from Rays of the One Light. Thank you. These are commentaries written by Swamiji based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda about the comparison of the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. And this week is entitled, What is the Best Way to Pray? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Jesus Christ and Sri Krishna both advised praying to the God as personal, yet both emphasized also that God is above form and that he must be sought ultimately in infinity. As Jesus put it, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Yet he spoke of God constantly as our Heavenly Father. In what is known as the Lord's Prayer, he proposed a very human prayer to the Heavenly Father, asking fulfillment for all our spiritual needs. The Bhagavad Gita explains that man, living as he does in a human body, finds it difficult to worship infinity as though the ego and body didn't even exist. Far better for human beings, Krishna said, to work with reality as we know it than to affirm a reality of which the human mind is incapable of forming any clear notion. Encouraging the devotee in this direction, he said, O Arjuna, be thou a yogi. That is to say, be one who works with, not in rejection of, the energies of the body and the natural tendencies of the mind. In the 12th chapter of the Gita, Arjuna asks Krishna, those who ever steadfast worship thee as devotees, that is to say, in an I and thou relationship, and those who contemplate thee as the immortal, unmanifested spirit, which group is the better versed in yoga? The Blessed Lord replied, those who fixing their minds on me, adore me, ever united to me through supreme devotion, are in my eyes the perfect knowers of yoga. Those whose strict aim is union with the unmanifested choose a more difficult way. Arduous for embodied beings is the path of dedication to the Absolute, that is to say, the path of Jnana Yoga. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. When we were chanting this morning, we haven't ever played that chant together, and there was a chord missing in what I was looking at, trying to figure out what that chord was as I was playing. And it reminded me of a time many years ago when we had first started playing guitars and harmoniums together. The Indian way, as far as I know, is just playing melody, no drone note, no drone note that's held down throughout the whole song. And then we gradually added a drone, which helped to fill out the harmonium. And then in about 1988 or so, maybe 87, we started trying to incorporate harmoniums and guitars together, which is not easy. You have to coordinate a lot. And so when we started doing this in Italy, and then I came back to America from Italy, and I formed a little chanting group. And it was heaven to chant with these people. There were 3 others, and we also sang Swami's music. So we would have a rehearsal for Swami's music with a whole group of 12 or 14 people for 2 hours, 7 to 9. We were younger then. And then this little group of the 4 of us would stay up, and we'd keep working on the chants until 1 or 2 in the morning. We were so inspired. We were so dedicated. We loved the music so much. And so what we were trying to do is work out how guitars could play chords, and we could change the drone notes or play chords so that we could play together. And what we were creating was so incredibly beautiful that we just wanted to play any chants, anywhere, anytime, with anybody that we could find. And so, we were at Ananda Village, so people kind of took us up on that. And the meditation retreat, which is, 20 minutes from the village, has a 5 a.m. meditation on Saturday, or did at that time. And they invited us to come. And it was winter. And the only vehicle we had amongst all of us was a very funky old van that had no heat. So we would get up at the way before dawn, and we would pack into this freezing cold van in the snow and try to make it up that hill to the retreat, and we would chant our little hearts out for this meditation. And one morning when it was really, really cold, and nobody, of course, thought to turn on the heat in the temple, so the temple was freezing, I was sitting there chanting, and my friend, the guitarist, was chanting with me. He was they all were brilliant guitarists. So he was chanting along with me, and every time we hit this one place in the chant, it would be a discordant chord. It was like, what is wrong with him? He's good at this. Why is he doing that? And I looked over at one point, and his hand was frozen. He couldn't make that chord. And, usually when somebody makes a mistake, when you're singing or you're doing something, performing, there's this tendency, and I remember one lady in the choir in particular, we had to try to get her to not do this, but she would turn around and stare at the person who made the mistake, like. But in this instance, I just remembered the joy that I felt. It just shot up my spine. And he was making this mistake over and over and over. And every time it just got more and more joyful, more and more filled with inspiration. And that joy is what we need to live in all the time. Things go wrong. Things happen that you expect it to be a certain way, you want it to be a certain way, and life just has other ideas. Life just keeps throwing you things to work on. That's all life is. Here, change. Here, grow. I don't want to. Keep at it. Keep growing, keep changing, keep learning how to live in more and more joy. That's all life is. It's a test from God. Can you love me more? Can you love me enough to do this or that? How about this? So when we talk about this vision that Arjuna had, if you read it in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is the greatest warrior of all time. He was the best of the whole Pandavas in the battle of Kurukshetra. Arjuna was the great warrior. And he asked and received the vision of God as God really is. And this is a very, very rare and wonderful thing to have achieved. But even Arjuna, this great warrior, was trembling, and his hair was standing on end. He was rapt and ecstatic and terrified because he saw God. And I can't quote all of it, but I remember this vision. Everywhere, God's mouths and heads. Just imagine seeing God in every atom of this table and every petal of the flower and every being, every creature, everywhere. And I remember talking about this with Swami, and I was so inspired, this everywhere is mouths and heads. And Swami was like, mouths and heads. Everybody's different. Everybody experiences God and inspiration in a different way. That's one of the most beautiful parts of this creation, that God is coming to each one individually, personally. And Swami would say, if you want to worship God as a sacred crocodile, he will come to you in that way. Whatever is dearest to your heart, that's how God will come. So how do we create that? How do we love that? As the reading is saying here, God is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and in truth. So we have to find that which brings out the devotion in us. And if we, in India they have the Ishta Devata, your personal God, that form that is most dear to you. So some people have the form of a baby Krishna, and they sing to it, and they hold it, and they bathe it, and clothe it, and worship it. That's their Ishta Devata. Some people, like Swami, particularly love the Divine Mother, that sweetness and gentleness and beauty of the Divine Mother. But whatever appeals to us, and if we haven't found that yet, if we're looking for that, what we can do is worship spirit and truth and purify our minds so that we can begin to perceive that vision of God. So I have often paraphrased this saying of St. Paul's from the Bible, but I finally just wrote it down so I could say it exactly. And I think this is extremely good advice, especially for us now in this age. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. So this is a very important part of the spiritual path, to focus on that which is good that which is true and holy and noble, and to fill your mind with those things. I recently have been, somebody showed me how to play these New York Times word games. And I thought, well, okay, you're supposed to play these sorts of games because they're good for your brain. So I did Wordle, and Wordle's good because you can get through it in 3 to 5 minutes, and that's fine. But then there's spelling bee. And you have to figure out how many words to make out of these 7 letters, and there's 1 letter in the middle that you have to use in every word. And, sometimes it's 20 words, which is not such a bad commitment of time. But the one I was looking at recently was 30 words. No, it was 59 words. And my brain just got overwhelmed. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night saying, divvied, that works, this ridiculous word, like you divvy something up, except you couldn't have a Y, it had to be an I instead, so divvied worked. I thought, that's it. I'm spending too much time on this stupid word game. So we have to fill our minds with good things. Study the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita. Come to these, for Kriyabans, we have these classes that are very helpful studying Master's teachings. Put your energy into what will give you the best result. Fill your mind with God. These songs that we sing at Sunday service, Swami's music, and Dharmadas is going to sing a beautiful one here in a moment. Those words are philosophy in song, he used to call it. He took Master's teachings, a brilliant idea, and he put them to music. And so, having sung them for 45 years, those lyrics keep coming into my mind at just the right moment. That's where we need to put our energy. Put our energy into what is healing. The more that we are at peace and centered and uplifted in our consciousness, the better the world will be. We don't have to worry about the astrology and the climate and all the natural disasters. Make your heart God's home. And then you will be at peace. And even in the midst of crashing worlds, you will be able to stand unshaken. And trust in God. I wanted to just close by reading this little quotation from Swami. To pray effectively, we must think of God as a listening, loving, interested, ever-accepting presence. The most important aspect of prayer is unconditional, ever-trusting love for God. So, as Jesus said, we need to pray believing. There's that beautiful quotation from Jeremiah. God says to the devotee, I know the plans I have for you. Plans not to harm you, but to give you hope and a future. So trust that that's what God has for each of us. Everything we're going through, everything that bothers us or upsets us or makes us anxious, it's all just a little word game. It's a little test of God. Will you love me now? Will you remember me? We need to keep that constant loving presence as something that we viscerally feel around us. Always protecting, always caring, always interested. God is there. We just need to open our eyes and see him.
Nirmala was talking about the music and the dynamics of trying to make it sound right and mistakes, and I'm reminded of one of these classic apocryphal situations that comes up in a choir where you have four parts interacting, and similar to what Nirmal was saying about the lady who would swivel around and stare down whoever made the mistake. So in this apocryphal example, the sopranos stop and say there was a mistake, and the altos say, oh, they say, and it was the altos. And the altos say, yeah, it was us. And the tenors say, was there a mistake? And the basses say, what song are we singing? And unfortunately, it is remarkably true. Not to take anything away from the altos, because they sing nicely generally, but anyway. There was a very sweet little video clip that I saw this week. One of these, nowadays with technology, you have all sorts of interesting possibilities that were not there in the same way in the past. So there's these little cameras that people install on their doorknob cameras, and you get all these fascinating, videos that come from the doorknob camera. And, you see the spider crawling across the doorknob, or the doorbell. And the spider looks like he's the size of Cincinnati. It's like, this thing's going to take over the world. Or, the three bears come up looking, to rummage in the trash or whatever. You see all this stuff. Well, anyway, in this particular video, it's broad daylight. And you see the little 4-year-old boy. There's a big package on the front porch, and he evidently thinks it's his duty to bring the packages inside when they've been delivered. So he goes trundling outside and gets a hold of this package. Well, the package is way bigger way heftier than he is ready to deal with. And it starts to fall over on top of him. And it's a 100-pound package. And it, it's sliding down the railing and starting to smush him. And you hear this little squeal. Well, what you don't realize is that, because you have to watch the video about 3 times to see it, there is a UPS driver across the street in his truck, and he gets out of that truck and he makes it across the street and all the way up the stairs of this house so fast. It's like in 2 seconds he is across the street and he gets that package off the kid. The kid has just started to scream and he sort of looks up. It's like, who are you? And we have been that little kid. And prayer so often results from or comes about in the situation in which we find ourselves trying to manage something that's way bigger than we're sort of queued up to deal with. We don't understand the reality of that 100-pound package that we're trying to muscle at 4 years old. It's just a little bigger than what we're capable of dealing with. And it starts to fall, and bam, there's the divine. Now, here's the interesting case, though, because this question of what is the best way to pray, this is a kind of a head scratcher. This is tougher than the spelling bee on the New York Times, and the spelling bee can be tough, I will admit. I regret to say that I have a certain responsibility for having gotten Nirmala tangled up in these games, because I often do them myself. Not always, because the ones that have 59 words, you can spend half the day fooling around with that. It's just way too much of an investment. But I was reflecting on what this question of what is the best way to pray, and how do we get the response that we're looking for? And this thought struck me, and I've never heard anyone else say it, and it's a little hard to articulate, so you're going to have to stick with me for a second. But the prayer itself, which is to say the quality of it, the sincerity of it, is, in a certain way of looking at it, the response. Now that's a weird thing to say, but what I'm driving at is you can't say a perfect prayer and not receive a response from the divine. You can't be absolutely sincere and absolutely still, which is to say undistracted, and not get a response from the divine. But unfortunately for most of us, much of the time, prayer represents kind of a slightly distracted, slightly overcommitted, slightly anxious or greatly anxious expression. And it's a sincere expression perhaps, but it's not, or it represents a kind of, okay, look, I'm paying out in prayer here. You better reimburse me in response. You know, it gets this kind of little bit of a merchant consciousness going. And, you know, it's like, hey, I've put in my kriyas here now. I want to see some results. Let's, you know, there was a brother disciple of Swamiji's who, you know, Master said in Autobiography of a Yogi, 1,000,000 kriyas. Now, 1,000,000 kriyas is a lot of kriyas. I mean, in theory, you could get them done in 3 years, but I mean, that is a lot of kriyas. Well, but there was some brother disciple who, you know, totted up his kriyas and said, okay, I've done my 1,000,000, where, you know, lay it on me. And Master flat out said, he'll never get there that way. God's not a merchant. You know, there has to be devotion. There has to be self-offering. It's not just, you know, look, I've paid out my kriyas, send me some realization. It's like there's a commitment inside that says, Divine Mother, I'm yours. And this is one of the things that Swamiji exemplified for us, because in fact in the latter years of his life, he was almost entirely focused on self-offering to the Divine Mother. And he was acting as an instrument for Master, and bless you, helping to build Master's work. But in his own inner life, it was a self-offering to the Divine Mother. And for him, the outward circumstances, see, that's another aspect of prayer that can hang us up. You know, if we're praying, Lord, the 49ers have got to win today. You know, it's like, well, you know, maybe they will and maybe they won't. I mean, you know, nobody wins every single time. And so if you set yourself up for something like that, then it's like the outward circumstance becomes the answer to the prayer. And that's touchy. That's setting ourselves up for failure, because the outward world is always going to change. You know, as Nirmala was saying, change is about the only constant that we have. So we can't be looking to what's outside. And Swamiji makes this point in the reading, in the affirmation and in the main reading, that we have to look for progressive understanding. We have to look for the communion. Some years ago, when the wildfires were brutal and the air was even worse here in Sacramento, at one of the Sunday services, I suggested that we obviously pray for rain, and that's a really good thing to do now also. But I wanted to suggest something broader, and I'm going to remind us of it. I'm going to suggest it right now as well. We don't have wildfires going crazy this year. The air quality's been reasonably good. How often do we pray even when we've already received the answer to our prayer, even when we already feel fulfilled. So often we wait until it's the 11th hour and we're about to take the exam, or it's, some disaster has happened and, oh my God, what are we going to do now? That's the wrong time to start. I mean, any time is better than no time. Okay, I'm not going to say it's not a good time to pray, because you should always pray. But I loved in the song we sang, if you take the 4th verse of Secret of Laughter and you replace the word sing with the word pray, you could say, pray when the sun shines, pray when the rain falls, pray when your road seems strange. Anybody's road ever seems strange? In a tempest, seize the lightning flash and ride the winds of change. That is a beautiful way to look at life. Sing when the sun shines, sing when the rain falls, sing when your road seems strange. Whatever it is, sing, pray, love God with all your heart, because it has to be all the time, not just when things are going great, not just when things are about to be a disaster, but all the time. And then it really doesn't matter. The outward circumstances, okay, on a superficial level, yes, they do matter. But on an inward level, no. Because then we have that communion, we have that connection. I mentioned this briefly in the fire ceremony this morning, that this amazing study was done with moms and kids, and with neurological brainwave testing. They discovered that when they're both focused on the same thing, the brain waves get in sync. I mean, literally they get on the same wavelength. And we need to get on the wavelength of the divine, and which means reaching up, which means raising our energy. When we do, the prayer that we offer, we don't just pray believing, because believing can kind of seem like, well, yeah, kind of believe, the Red Sox are going to do it this year, or whatever. I mean, it's like you kind of believe whatever. But when you know, it's almost like Christ is saying, don't just pray believing, pray knowing. When you pray knowing, then you already have the response. The very prayer itself is the response. And it's like it opens that doorway to this connection, and there's oneness. I asked Swamiji once, many years ago, when the Festival of Light was brand new and this touch of light was something that was happening, I mean, literally every day at that point. I asked him once, Swamiji, how should we receive the blessing? And I said, should I be praying for the person offering the blessing? And he just was so sweet the way he responded, and it kind of spun my head around, but he just said, just think of blessing. Now, don't think of I am receiving, this person is giving. He just said, just think of blessing. In other words, just go into the blessing. And that's kind of the answer to what is the best way to pray. Go into the prayer. Go into the communion that is true prayer. And then you come to know. And there's no more if, maybe, kind of, sort of. It's just this immediate sense of communion and oneness.